Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies at Charles Darwin University, and welcome to Outrider 10, Mandalorian Citations. Yes! This is the second instalment in our Joanne trilogy, our trilogy that's exploring the politics of citation. If you remember last week, as per Joanne's request, I explored how we all make ethical decisions about who we read and who we cite. How do we decide that this is an appropriate citation for us? And that's great, but this week's a little bit different because it's the recognition that we don't actually cite for ourselves. We don't cite to feel better about ourselves as a human. Instead, we cite to render our research ethical and repeatable and transparent to our academic communities, to our disciplines, and to our paradigms. Now, for some methodology, some disciplines, repeatability is part of the very story. So the very foundation of scientific methods is repeatability. So that experiment must be run by other humans in the same conditions to create the same outcome. And repeatability is crucial to scientific methodologies. But if you think about it, colleagues, all disciplines have that repeatability element to it. And that is why we provide citations. That is why we reference, so that another human being can check our work. So we've constructed a particular argument, we've made judgments in our analysis, and that's great, but the whole point of the references is that somebody can check our work. Citations don't exist for us to feel better about ourselves, to be a bit right on in our politics. They don't exist for that reason. They exist to ensure rigour and precision and accountability in our work. Therefore, this second instalment for Joanne explores the role of citations in our academic disciplines. And obviously, we have a friend for the week. Mandalorian citations, yes. And there's a reason why we're here. Because this is the way. This is the way. Let me show you what I mean. We're going to be looking at Jedi citations, the good citations. We're going to be looking at Sith citations. We're also going to be looking at sort of ugly citations, so the Jabba the Hutt citations. But the goal of this week is for you to find your way through citations and to situate and contextualize your citations into the very requirements of your academic disciplines. You see, the Mandalorians have been the bounty hunters of the Star Wars universe. They were chased off their home world, and in that scattered formation, they had to continue to create a community. And they did that through maintaining particular principles, pretty odd principles, but principles. This is the way. So if you think about it, that's a pretty interesting metaphor for what's happening to academics at the moment in higher education. It's a great metaphor because we've sort of been scattered. What do we stand for? No one cares. We're underfunded. It's chaotic. It's disrupted. But in this dreadful situation, it's important that we as academics stand for something, and that's why this is the way. There's a lot of talk about the importance of citations, and they are important, but that importance varies enormously between different disciplines. Citations are a proxy for quality, for impact, for influence, for esteem, and they're also a lagging indicator. So it can be some years, and indeed in some famous cases, some decades before an important article or book will reveal its significance. Now, there's a lot of assumptions in the citation universe, if you will, about what the citations mean. What are those influences and what are they a proxy for? This is a big issue. So often, whenever we go into meetings in international higher education, we hear about top-tier journals, and we hear about an H-index. right? So we hear about numbers, right? And no one sort of questions or probes or drills into the meaning of those numbers. They're thrown around as if they're meaningful, as if those meanings are in fact self-evident. Now, this Outrider and we are not going to take that easy path today. Instead, we're going to probe all parts of this conversation for your evaluation, for your consideration. I'm not presenting an argument that I want you to agree with. I just want you to stop thinking that the number on its own is meaningful and self-evident. So let's move to the Jedi Knight of citations. So citations are great because they are a proxy that demonstrates that your work is being read. It confirms that your networking is in place and you're developing a good career where you're able to move one step ahead at a time and show that your research is having a role and impact in change. And that's great. But also, it's never been easier than it is right now to measure those citations. Google Scholar citations allow us pretty well in real time to keep up to date with the number of citations, but also who's citing, where they are, and what disciplines they're working in. So the key is for all of us that we create the best quality publications that we can at a particular time, that the keywords are clear, the abstract is clear. But also we need to make sure that we are referencing other scholars as well. And there are many reasons for that. Firstly, it's the right thing to do. But also many scholars have a Google alert or a Google Scholar alert on themselves. So whenever anybody mentions them, they know that somebody has mentioned them. So then they will read your article. So we now have a series of longitudinal studies from information science that shows the longer your list of references, then the more often you are cited. And Webster from the University of Florida has done some fantastic work on the length of the reference list and the citations of that article. Good. So also, if your research is solving a problem, it gains some citations. So what happens is all of us, and you can never really predict this, but if you're working or researching in an area that draws a lot of heat, right? I've done it only a few times in my career, but for example, in the first decade of this century, I got very, very involved in writing about educational technology at the very point that people were throwing money at schools and throwing money at universities, just for technology. All the focus was on software and on hardware, and there was no focus on wetware. And so I wrote a series of publications, including 3 books, that explored a critical response to educational technology. And those books were titled Digital Hemlock, The University of Google, and Digital Dieting. And they've picked up some of the highest citations in my career because they were solving a problem. But clearly nothing beats quality. And it's good to remember, I think, that when we're desperately looking for citations, the chances are you won't receive a single citation for about a year and a half. Okay, so when you go, where are the citations? Nothing really happens for about a year and a half. And studies show that if you're going to get a high cite piece, so that's probably 300 citations and above, you're going to know that at about the 3 to 7 year mark. So a high cite piece, 3 to 7 years, you'll know if you're going to get there. So, okay, you've written a ripper of a paper. Incredibly well done. Brilliant. Now, here are some quick hints that you need to do at this point to lift up the possibility of being cited. The first one is choose your keywords carefully. And there are 2 ways to do this. Firstly, make sure you've got the big ticket item keywords in place. So higher education, cancer, COVID-19, very important. But then also make sure that you've got some edgy keywords in there. So, in my sort of field, media literacy, multimodality, pandemic studies. So go edgy as well. And importantly too, titles matter a great deal, and try and make sure your big keywords are also in your title, because the algorithm tends to weight the terms in the title, so it will be easier to be found. Now, this next tip may be important to you or not, but I will raise it. And the key is try and keep your name as consistent as possible through your career. So I was born with the name Tara Brabazon. I love my name. My father did really well. Good on you, Big Kev. And I've written my entire career using this name, and that's been brilliant. Similarly, my late husband, Steve Redhead, used Steve Redhead throughout his career, even though he was a Stephen, a PH Stephen. So make a determination about your name, and through claiming and using that name, people will be able to follow and find you. And you can use all sorts of strategies to enable that too, like, for example, Orchid being a clear example. Okay, now a key point is to also check your proofs very carefully. This is a biggie. Not only does that lift the quality of the article itself, but you will be amazed how many errors you find in the proofreading stage. Particularly, can I say, and this has happened to me a lot, errors in the spelling of your name or in the very title of the article. So make sure that your name, the title, and the affiliation, your university affiliation, is correct so that people can find you. So work also on the accessibility of your papers. Now, open access matters. We know that. Citations increase enormously if the article is open access because it is discoverable. So don't believe all the hype about author processing fees. Over 2/3 of open access journals are platinum open access. That means that nobody pays to read the article and you don't pay to write the article. 2/3 of open access journals don't have author processing fees, okay? So if you want to find those journals, please go to the directory of open access journals, www.doaj.org, and select the journals without author processing fees. It's simply a little box that you tick. Okay, so to lift citations, there are certain things or modes of output to avoid. And one of them is conference proceedings. Now, let me just state clearly right from the start for my wonderful friends in engineering and in computer science, you ignore this advice. We all know that engineering and computer science, your conference proceedings are cited very well. Knock yourself out. For the rest of us, that's simply not the case. And similarly, book chapters tend to have under or small levels of citation. Right. Where I would use conferences, though, is they can lift your profile enormously, but that is only if when you speak at a conference, you present your little bit of research that you're talking about, but also make sure that you mention the other research that you have done with its references and citations. Now, we all know social media is absolutely crucial to citations, and I'll do a series of Outriders to help you on that because I've received a lot of requests. So yes, absolutely. Present your open access article on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Insta if you like, certainly Twitter, perhaps Pinterest, depending on your area. So one strategy that I've never used, and the literature absolutely recommends this, so I will present it for you, is to send the article out to the people who you have cited, and do this soon after the article itself appears. So of course people can then see your work, and of course people love reading about themselves and reading their citations, so it is suggesting that you might actually get a citation back. So there's a lot of talk of top ranked journals, tier 1 journals, etc. But the journal is not a guarantee of citations. There is no halo effect. One way I know some colleagues attempt to manage the digital academic glut is to only read high impact journals. Now, that's not me, and that's not most people I know, to be honest, but that's also not a future proofing strategy. Let me show you why. In the old days, and this was 10 years ago, publishers would send academics the table of contents of a particular journal, right? So they would send you the list that was in that particular issue of that journal, and we would vertically work down that table of contents. Now, all of that has now stopped. What is happening in terms of the studies emerging from information science is when we are searching for material, we go into Google Scholar and we place keywords in or subject areas in the search bar and click enter. So that's a horizontal mode of searching. So it's a very different formation. And of course, you're not really searching at all for the journal. You're looking for the subject area. You're looking for the content. Now, they're our Jedi Knight citations. Fantastic. That strategy can work for you. But we need to get into the Sith citations. Now, there are in the universe two types of citations: referential citations and critical citations. Referential citations refer to the articles, the research, the output that contributes to the development of knowledge, and that's what we want. Critical citations are the citations that demonstrate that something is wrong with the research. So critical citations, and this is the absolutely pivotal bit here, critical citations are higher than referential citations. So that means, and this is crucial, really, really poor research receives citations. So when we as scholars locate very poor scholarship, we cite it to show how rubbish it is. And I'll give you two examples from fields in which I work. The first is what I call the Prensky effect. Mark Prensky. He wrote a truly appalling article, series of articles, presentations, and even a book. And I apologise for this phrase, I'm going to use it. He developed the concept of, quote unquote, digital natives. Can you imagine? So tens of thousands of scholars around the world cited Prensky to show that that idea was completely rubbish. So he explored, for example, how the young people use technology, and of course it was completely discredited. Similarly, Richard Florida developed a series of indices to explore the creative class. Right? And these indices were shown to be pretty well rubbish, particularly after the global financial crisis. And so Florida has received a lot of citations of people like me that prove that that particular way of thinking about economic social development is flawed. So as you can see, these citations are not proving excellence and they're not proving quality, but they prove that someone is wrong. Seriously wrong, so that other academics have to disprove the argument. So as you can see, citations are very messy. They require faith. They also require a little bit of luck. And if you're lucky enough to get through refereeing, which takes time, and you're lucky enough to get published, which takes time, then you just hope that you're going to get cited. And yes, we've already talked about some strategies that we can use to increase the chances of getting those citations. And, you know, we can intervene and try and point scholars to our research. But this is a slow and often pretty depressing task. And also importantly, and this matters more to me than I can tell you, you know, I can sort of die happy knowing that I've seen this at this stage of my academic career. But the professionalism and the integrity of academic journals and academic research is increasing. And it's increasing because we've got all sorts of new diagnostic tools like text matching software, authorship declarations and authorship verifications. We also have things like conflict of interest statements. And we talked about the Wakefield case last week, you know, the nightmare in the Lancet, you know, vaccines, autism, nightmare. And the Lancet, of course, retracted that paper. And the editor of the Lancet revealed that if they had known about the conflict of interest, then the piece wouldn't have been published. And that's interesting, I think. And that conflict of interest was that Wakefield had filed a patent for a standalone measles vaccine administered independently from mumps and rubella. So if that had been known, the article wouldn't have been published. Therefore, and this is my key sort of life argument, the citations that are being received today are not really comparable in any form to citations from 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, perhaps even 5 years ago. And if you think about all those truly weird historic articles that are often called mass authorship articles, 200 plus authors, with no authenticity statement in place, you've got to ask some questions. Now, I've argued through my career that we need to tighten, really tighten up what is an author in academic papers. And of course, research codes of conduct, of which Australia has a really good one, are examples of that. But you see, the problem we've got, and this is an international problem, is that it's in the interests of academics to be the freeloading postdoc. It's in the interests of academics to add themselves to all sorts of different articles, because that is how they gather up citations. Okay, and the real problem, I think, that's a disaster in and of itself, but to be frank, the real problem is so many organisations take those citations and create a citation-based analysis to enable grants and to enable promotion. So they render the citations incredibly meaningful without actually probing what's going on here. Now, of course, they're not as meaningful as are being suggested by these individual numbers. So McRoberts in 2010 demonstrated in their great research that only about a third of the great materials that influence us that we read, only about a third of those materials do we cite. So citation does not demonstrate influence at all, or what's been important to us, because we only cite about a third of the stuff that has been important to us. And of course, here we go, the citation databases only capture a very small slice, in some cases, of particular disciplinary areas. Now, Google Scholar archives a much wider array of journals than Web of Science or Scopus, and that's because of the speed of coverage and the extremity of coverage that Google Scholar has. So lots and lots of disciplines, and it finds those citations quickly. So let's get into this. A majority of social sciences and humanities journals are not included in Scopus. Books are rarely incorporated into Scopus. So the single authored scholarly monograph is the gold standard of research, and yet it is only occasionally captured in Scopus. Now, don't get me wrong, I respect all knowledge, from engineering right the way through to fine arts. I've placed my entire life, if you will, on the value and the importance of the comprehensive university of all disciplines. I believe in excellence and expertise wherever I might find it. But Scopus actively marginalises and erases about half of the disciplines in our universities, because it rarely includes books or book chapters. And this is not me saying this. Let me cite the information science research here, and this will change your life. This research came from 2018 from Martin, Ordana, Malial, Thewal, and Lopez Cozar. And they published an analysis of Web of Science, Scopus, and Google Scholar. And this is what they discovered. Quote, "The results by broad areas showed that Google Scholar was able to find most citations in the social sciences, 94%, while Web of Science and Scopus found 35 and 43% respectively. Moreover, Google Scholar was able to find 93% of citations that were found by Web of Science and 89% of citations found by Scopus. Last but not least, over 50% of all citations to social science articles were only found by Google Scholar. End of quote. So 50% of citations in the social sciences are not present in Web of Science and Scopus. This study also showed the benefit of Google Scholar incorporating documents into their database that are not in the English language, that are in a diversity of languages, which is terrific. So, knowing all we know now about Scopus and Web of Science and Google Scholar and all the talk we have about globalization and internationalization, why would any university ignore Google Scholar, particularly when they're thinking about promoting a colleague, promoting an academic? And there are at least, and I can't mention them because I write references for people and I'm the external referee for many of these universities, but about a third of the universities in this country, at least Australia, use Scopus to provide their citations to assess whether someone's worth promoting. Think about what that does to all those great scholars in the social sciences and the humanities. It's a disgrace. So, for example, just so you know that you're not alone, please feel free to use my example. So I've published 20 books. I've published well over now 250 refereed articles. I publish in journals from around the world. I intentionally try to publish outside of Europe and outside of North America, and I publish a lot of nitros, non-traditional research objects. Now, hang on to yourself. My Google Scholar metric is 4 times that of Scopus. Now, Google Scholar's a bit higher for everybody. So Jamie Quinton, experimental physicist, his Google Scholar is 9.68% higher than his Scopus, so it's a little bit higher. But whenever anyone starts to go, oh, Scopus, just use my example. The books that I write from great international publishers are not in Scopus, but some random who wrote a 100, 200, 300 word review of that book, if they're in a journal that Scopus actually includes, then they're in their citation database. So the book is not in Scopus, but some random who did a review is. Let me give you one more taste of this crazy system, what we need to fight. And I'll tell you a story. I was in a meeting a couple of years ago with a professor, it's always a professor, who was very clear in this committee and tried to explain, or shout us down really, but explain to the committee that a multi-authored article should be valued or weighted in the same way as a singly authored scholarly monograph. And she was arguing that an article of 5, 6, 7,000 words with 6, 7, 8 authors should be equal to a 70,000 word book written by one person. That's what we're fighting at the moment. This is nonsense, obviously. But think about how this nonsense is perpetuated in our citation system. Look at Google Scholar and just go in on any discipline and try and find an article with 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 authors. And every citation that article receives, every whole citation goes into all those people's profiles. The whole citation goes into 50 people's profile. Find a book with one author and all the citations of that book go into that one person's profile. Now, are these citations equal? Well, We now have the crazy situation where whatever position a person is in the article list, they receive that whole citation. So it's not first author, last author. If you spend your life as the freeloading postdoc, as author 4 of 9, then you are able to gain the citations of all these articles. So this system means that the people who get themselves onto all these multi-authored papers reap the benefits of other people's work. But of course the ironies continue, colleagues. Collaboration's a value. That's a great ticker box on a form. Collaboration, yes. So the sole researcher who doesn't have research assistants or PhD students who actually do all of their own research, they're questioned for their ability to play with others. So as you can see, this entire system of citations is geared for academics to feed off the research of other people, colleagues, postdocs, early career researchers, and indeed PhD students. And a senior professor said to me pretty recently, last week, that he describes his PhD students as, quote, workers, end of quote. This system is configured to be unjust, and the citation metrics are geared to reward the freeloading postdocs, even if they are professors. So yes, thankfully we now have some very strong and robust research codes of conduct. And yes, journals brilliantly are asking for percentages of contribution of authors in articles. So design, data collection and analysis, and substantive writing and editing. And all of that is so incredibly welcome. But none of this is changing how citations and authorship are measured. All any of us can do is work hard and behave ethically. And I know, and I'm sure you know, that most of us have some pretty shocking war wounds. Those of us that are of a certain age, some very, very bad stuff has happened to us very, very often. So when this freeloading postdoc behaviour starts to be aggressively patrolled through research codes of conduct, then all of our colleagues, our PhD students, our ideas will be protected. And then the research world will change. So besides these traditional configurations of citations, all sorts of alternatives are available. Altmetrics is available. I backed altmetrics about 7 years ago, but it hasn't really kicked on. It may become important. It's great to assess impact in its many modes, but it's not being used as often as it could have been. So, okay, we've looked at the Jedi citations, we've looked at the Sith citations. Let's now, colleagues, let's claim our Mandalorian citation, shall we? And let's fight the good fight against the Empire. So it is time to release the bounty hunter. Here are the citation proxies that we need to fight, and fight hard for the rest of our careers. Now, there's lots, as you can see, of powerful critiques. Powerful researchers have critiqued citations, and particularly critiqued that they're a proxy for value. And a great example of this is, there is an argument that medicine papers are cited 20 times more than geology papers. So does that suggest that medicine papers are 20 times more valuable than geology papers? Well, I think not. And a friend of mine, Jackie, hi Jackie, a friend of mine once described citations as equivalent to judging somebody's intelligence by their income. So as we all know, there basically is no connection at all between the money that somebody earns and their ability to be intelligent. They're not connected. So it's an incorrect proxy. There are really two dreadful examples of citations that we, as Mandalorians, we must fight. So let's get into this. Self-citation occurs when you cite your own work. Now, sometimes self-citations are absolutely legitimate and important, But if I'm really honest with you, some of the most dreadful human beings, most dreadful academics I've met through my career heavily self-cite, because they're sort of pretending that they're significant. This is a real Kath and Kim thing, like, look at me, look at me, look at me. So there are legitimate examples of self-citation. It is important. So say an article extends your previous work, then it is important that you self-cite the scaffold that got you to this current place. That's important. And this is crucial, particularly so that you avoid what I call zombie plagiarism, which is self-plagiarism. Still makes me laugh. But say you've produced a piece of journalism, a podcast, a video like this, and an article has emerged from this work. Well, or for example, let's use another great science example. Say in one particular article you've presented all the literature review and the methodology, and you've taken that same literature review and methodology but just changed one variable. Do you have to repeat everything again and self-cite? Well, it's much easier if you can just reference the other article. So do that. So self-citation can be useful. Now, I have, like most people, I have a tendency to self-cite, and in fact last week I got referee reports for one of my articles, and it was quite lovely. One of the peer reviews, obviously it was a blind peer review, said, oh look, you need to be citing some Brabazon work in your article. Now of course they didn't know that Brabazon was actually the author, so that was a lovely weird moment. And indeed research show that women self-cite 56% less than men do. So remember to self-cite when you're placing your current research in a wider context. If you're doing it just to pick up your count, just don't, please don't. If you're doing it through arrogance, and this is always the worst stuff, so no one is as clever as me, nobody's produced any work as good as my work on this topic, so I'll just continue to self-cite my stuff because I don't read anybody else because I don't have to. Stop doing that. So ask yourself, are you self-citing to demonstrate the cumulative nature of your research? Then excellent, knock yourself out. If you're doing it for personal gratification and ego, please stop. Please stop. It's dreadful. If you're using it as a tactical strategy to demonstrate authority, then look, it's still a bit dreadful, but it's understandable. Okay, so finally, let's talk about the really yucky one, which is coercive citation. This has happened to me twice in my life. Both times occurred when I was quite a junior female academic, where a senior male academic put enormous pressure on me to cite him in an article. So coercive citation emerges when an editor forces an author to add an irrelevant citation before the journal will agree to publish that article. So those citations are used often to either pick up the impact factor of a journal, that can occur, or indeed most likely the citation count for the editor themselves. And a 2012 survey by Wilhite and Fong confirmed that 20% of academics working in economics, sociology, business and psychology had experienced coercive citation. And can I say, the two articles where it happened to me, it was in tourism journals, which of course is part of the business suite. So as you can see, citations are fascinating. They can be this incredible enriching pointer to show that our research is being used, and that's such a blessing. This is the way. But the issue is it's also valued by funding agencies and by promotion committees. And we need to remember, therefore, citations aren't one thing. There are Jedi citations, there are Sith citations, and we all need to find our way with citations and recognise they are a proxy for impact and engagement and esteem. But these citation figures are highly disciplinary specific, and the number of citations can never be read cleanly as an objective number. So when you, and I know you will be, when you're the leader of those funding agencies, when you're the chair of that promotions committee at the university, please remember a little bit of what we've talked about today. Don't accept the number. Drill into the number. Benchmark it by disciplines, benchmark it by field. And then you will, of course, find your way. I wish you love, light, and peace. T out.